Hello, this is Glenn Winningham, House of Fern, and you are listening to Do You Know Who You Are on These Changing Times radio station. We are going to be talking about color of law today. We started talking about that before, but on the last program that we had on Sunday, we didn't get it all finished, and so we're going to start over. Also, we're going to be talking about what's known as quasi-contracts, there's such a thing, believe it or not. That's what these bar members have brought us, is these quasi-contracts, and these quasi-contracts are in place because of, again, it's all because of our own ignorance, because they can only enforce these quasi-contracts against a fictitious entity. And because of our ignorance, we went out and got a birth certificate and driver's license, and all of those are fictitious entities. And so we set those things up, and so now they can shove these quasi-contracts down our straw man's throat, for lack of a better word, and use it as to facilitate our slavery. And that's essentially what it is. And so we'll talk about that. That's going to be part of this presentation. So we'll get into that here a little bit later. Anyways, I have a website. You can reach my website at www.sovereigntyinternational.info. That's all one word, www.sovereigntyinternational.info. I also have some groups. I have a group at These Changing Times Radio's website. And it's called sovereigntyinternational.info there as well. I've uploaded a few documents, and I've also I submit links to YouTube videos. This program will ultimately go onto YouTube as a video, and so then what will happen is that link will be submitted onto the group on These Changing Time Radio website, and. But I've also got a couple other groups, a couple private groups at Yahoo and Google, and I've uploaded a lot of documents there and things that I've done, and those groups are called Administrating Your Public Servants, and it's separate words, Administrating Your Public Servants, at Yahoo groups and Google groups, and so you can go there, and you'd have to request to join. I've also got links to my YouTube videos there as well at the Yahoo group. I've uploaded over 100 videos to YouTube, and my profile at YouTube is Sovereign Living, and you can watch my videos. Now, so the end result of all of this is that everything you need to assert your sovereignty is there. It's available for free, and anybody can do it. Literally, some of the stuff, especially in the States, is about race, but that's immaterial. All of this stuff is about slavery. It has nothing to do with race. Although some of the court cases talk about race, because some of them are old, Civil War type era, but it's really immaterial. And that's because of what other court cases are saying. And so it's really immaterial. Anybody can be sovereign, and all you have to do really is say the words, and you watch them die for cover. Anyways, we'll get going on this presentation called Color of Law, and there is color of law, there's color of justice, there's color of money. These things that you carry around in your wallet, whether it's Federal Reserve notes or Bank of Canada notes or Bank of England notes, they're color of money because they're not real money. There's color of justice. What you get in the courts is not justice, it's color of justice, something that looks like justice. It's the appearance of justice, but it's not justice. There's color of title when you buy land, because what you get when you buy land is not real title either. We'll talk about that when we go over the land titles presentation. But this one here is about color of law, We talk about color of money when we talk about the money presentation. That's a separate presentation. And we probably won't get to that one today, but we'll do more than this one. Anyways, so there's two kinds of legislative law. There's positive law and non-positive law. A positive law is law passed with legitimate authority. It's law passed to protect the rights of the people. Non-positive law is colorable legislation. It applies to certain groups of people, and it does not apply to sovereign citizens. And it operates as a contract. Okay, if you get yourself involved in it out of your ignorance, then there's a maxim of common law that says ignorance of the law is no excuse. And so if you're ignorant of the law, then you just got yourself into something. But again, if you made a mistake of law or fact, or if you were coerced or intimidated by some bureaucrat, there's your out. But the bottom line is the burden is on you to know the law and to bring up the right issues. And so, and that's what this program is all about, is what are the real issues and the ones that you need to bring up. So let's keep moving here. Positive law is, this is a definition taken from Black's Law Dictionary, 5th edition, quote, positive law actually and specifically adopted by proper authority for the government of an organized juror society, unquote. Now, the operative word here is proper authority. Okay, there's a lot of things that have to happen for a statute to become law, and if any one of those things does not happen, then it is not law. And they like to play all sorts of tricks. Now, generally speaking, there's somebody that's supposed to sign it and finally approve it, like a governor or a governor general in Canada, or lieutenant governor in Canada, or governor in the U.S., or president in the U.S. At any rate, they're supposed to know the law. They're supposed to know what's required for these statutes to become positive law, and so they're the ones that are supposed to approve them, and if they're not supposed to approve laws that are not properly adopted. And anyways, let's keep moving here. This is taken from the U.S. House of Representatives website. You can do a search on the internet for Office of Law Revision Council, and you'll get this website. Third paragraph down to the top, it says, quote, certain titles of the code have been enacted into positive law, and pursuant to Section 204 of Title I of the code, the text of these titles is legal evidence of the law contained in those titles. And then it goes on to say, it says, the other titles of the code are prima facie evidence of the laws contained in those titles. Now, one of the things that we're going to talk about is certain words. And one of those words is prima facie, okay? Now, and we're going to get into some definitions and talk about that a little bit. But so just remember that word for now, prima facie. And so the non-positive law titles of the United States Code are prima facie evidence, okay? Remember that. And then then it gives a list of the titles of the code that are positive law. Well, the ones that are not positive law are the ones that we're particularly interested in. So the non-positive law, the ones that are prima facie evidence, okay, are one of them is Title 6, okay, domestic security, okay, that means homeland security, and those hired thugs that go and like to touch your genitals and stuff at the airports, they are non-positive law, okay? And what I intend to show is that if it's non-positive law, it doesn't have any authority. It means absolutely nothing. And we'll go through some court cases and things that talk about that. But so here, these hired thugs at the airport don't have any authority to be there, and yet they're unlawfully going and touching our genitals and putting us through these gene scattering X-ray machines and doing all this stuff to us, and we're letting them do it. Anyways, Title 7, agriculture. Title 8, aliens and nationality, okay? Title 12, banking. Title 15, trade and commerce. Title 19, customs and duties. So, think about this for a minute. Everything that goes on at the border, they don't have any authority for, okay? In other words, Title 6, domestic security goes on at the border. Title 8, aliens and nationality goes on at the border. And Title 19, customs and duties goes on at the border. And not one of those has any authority. They're just a bunch of crooks. And if you don't understand that, then you're going to get abused. Title 20, education. Title 21, food and drugs. Title 25, Indians. And here's a good one, Title 26, internal revenue. Okay? The Internal Revenue Code is not positive law. That's consistent in Canada as well. There is no Income Tax Act in Canada or the U.S., and I suspect that the same thing applies in England as well, or any other country. They're non-positive law. Matter of fact, what I have done is I bought land, and I've had, sometimes I get these county tax assessors that decide they want to try and solicit me for revenue, and I send them a registered letter, and I tell them that your tax code is not positive law, and that makes it by definition color of law, and I go through and give them some court cases to think about, and then I tell them, and then finally, under Title 18, United States Code Section 241 and 242, you're violating my rights under the color of law, and that's a felony. And so if I hear another word about this, then I'm going to have your ass in jail. And I never hear another word about it. It's amazing how that works. Anyways, keep moving here. It looks like somebody's got a comment. Here's the site for the UK. Okay. Well, yeah, I'd have to look at the, I need to look at the acts. You know, there's got to be some place in the UK that talks about which laws have received royal assent. That's the ones that in England that you want, is the ones that have received royal assent, ones that the Queen has approved. Okay, and in Canada, it's the Governor Generals. Okay, so in the UK, it'll be the ones that have received royal assent, and I can guarantee you that it hasn't. And if it has, it hasn't received it as positive law. Okay, again, there's the two kinds of law. This is just their extortion propaganda is all that is. But anyways, so keep moving here. Some of the other acts that are non-positive law is Title 29, labor, and then public health and welfare, Title 42. Okay, and that means the Social Security Act falls under Title 42, United States Code. That means there is no Social Security Act. That means there is no Social Security number. That means that it's all a fraud, that it means absolutely nothing. There's a bunch more, but they're really irrelevant to the discussion at hand. Anyways, about half of them, quite frankly, in the U.S., about half of them are positive law, and about half of them are not positive law. And if you get mixed up in the ones that are not positive law, then it operates as a contract. The ones that are positive law, the only way you can get mixed up in them is if you violate somebody's rights. Okay, that's really, if you read those things, the ones that are positive law, it's instructions to the government to do things to protect the people. That's what they are, and that's the only legitimate function for government. If you remember, we talked about that under citizenship when we talked about why we set up governments in the first place. Well, if you read through those real positive law statutes, you will see that that's the government doing what it's supposed to be doing to protect us, we the people. And that's the only thing that's in there. And so unless we're out there killing people or beating them up or stealing all sorts of things, then they're not going to want to have anything to do with us under positive law. The only time they want to have anything to do with us if we get mixed up in this non-positive law. Anyways, in Canada, the Income Tax Act never received royal assent. In Canada, and this is extremely important, the British North America Bill, and I need to change this because that's what it is a bill. Okay, before an act becomes an act, it's a bill. Okay, and so the British North America Bill never received royal assent. So there is no British North America Act. Now think about that. If there is no British North America Act, then there's no Canada. Okay, that's the bottom line. If there is no British North America Act, there's no Canada. And if there's no income tax act, there's no income tax. But beyond that, how can there be an income tax act, or how could there be any act that's created under the authority of Canada when there's no Canada? Tell me that. How does that work out? I don't understand that. I'm having trouble with that. The same thing with the Customs Act or the Immigration Act. That's all a fraud. And there's someone that sent me an email and said that the Ontario Highway Traffic Act never received royal assent, which, why would I be surprised about that? I mean, that's pretty obvious that it wouldn't receive royal assent, quite frankly, because they don't have any authority. And the governor or the lieutenant governor in Ontario wouldn't want to be signing something like that because of the fact that that we have the common law right to travel, and they're purporting to regulate that. They have no authority to regulate our common law right to travel, and that's called perjury of oath. That's jail time for the governor. If there's no, well, yeah, we already talked about that. And here's a court case. This is Norton versus Shelby County, found at 118 U.S. 425, U.S. Supreme Court. Okay, quote, an unconstitutional act is not law. It confers no rights. It imposes no duties, affords no protection. It creates no office. It's in legal contemplation as inoperative as though it had never been passed, unquote. I mean, how can you possibly say it better than that? Okay? There is no British North America Act. There is no Income Tax Act. That all of it is a fraud. And they're just nothing but thieves is what they are. Non-positive law is color of law. Non-positive law statutes are martial law statutes, and we talk about that more when we talk about martial law. Non-positive laws have no authority and mean absolutely nothing. If there is any defect in the legislation, then there is no act. And a friend of mine, Patrick Ellis, correctly calls the BNA Act the BNA Bill, because that is all it is. It is not an act. It never received royal assent, and it will never be an act. Colorability. This is P.W. Hogg, Constitutional Law of Canada, 3rd edition. Colorability. Quote, colorability, a doctrine invoked when a statute is addressed to a matter outside jurisdiction, though it bears formal trappings of a matter within jurisdiction of the enacting legislature, unquote. Dictionary of Canadian Law, quote, colorable in appearance, but not in substance what it claims to be, unquote. Okay, so it's a fraud, appearance, something that appears like something, but it isn't. Okay, that's why color of money, okay, Bank of Canada notes are color of money. They look like money, they act like money, but they're not money, okay, because money is gold or silver coin. That's what money is, okay. That Bank of Canada notes or Bank of England notes or Federal Reserve notes are nothing but an IOU, and we talk about that in the presentation on money. They are nothing but an IOU, and they're not money. And if that's all you have in your wallet, then you're bankrupt. You don't have any money. And that's one of the things, even at common law, if you don't have any money, you are a vagrant and you don't have any rights either. Quote, color means an appearance, a semblance, a simulacrum, as distinguished from that which is real, a prima facie or apparent right. Hence, a deceptive appearance, a plausible assumed exterior, concealing a lack of reality, a disguise or a pretext, unquote. And that's taken from Black's Law Dictionary, 5th edition on page 240. Now, let's go back and talk about that a little bit. It says, a prima facie or apparent right. Prima facie. Remember, that was one of those words that we were talking about when we were at the Office of Law Revision Council. And it said that the non-positive law statutes are prima facie evidence of the laws of the United States. So this ties it together, okay? And so the non-positive law are color of law. They look like law, they act like law, but they're not. And it says, hence, a deceptive appearance, a plausible assumed exterior, concealing a lack of reality, a disguise or a pretext. It's a lie, is what it is. It's a lie. I mean, how much more can they come out and say it's a lie? These are lawyers talking about that, and so they won't say that. But that's exactly what it is it's a lie, it's a fraud, and they're nothing but criminals. Colorable means that which is in appearance only and not in reality what it purports to be. Hence, counterfeit, feigned, having the appearance of truth, unquote. And that's Wendell versus Flynn. That's 196 Oregon Reports, page 654. And it's also found at 251 Pacific Reports, second edition, page 136. So again, colorable means that which is in appearance only, not in reality what it purports to be. Hence the counterfeit, feigned, having the appearance of truth. Remember we talked about this. Something that's colorable has the appearance of something, okay? In other words, color of law has the appearance of law. Well, the same thing would also hold true that color of money has the appearance of money. Color of title has the appearance of title. A color of justice has the appearance of justice. But it's not. None of them are the real thing. Quote, color of law means the appearance or semblance without the substance of legal right. Misuse of power possessed by virtue of state law and made possible only because wrongdoers clothed with authority of state is action taken under color of law, unquote. That's Atkins versus Lennings. That's the U.S. District Court for Oklahoma, page, that's found at 415 Federal Supplements, page 186. And so, again, it's the appearance of law. It's a fraud. It's a lie. And color of law remember, it says made possible only misuse of power possessed by virtue of state law and made possible only because wrongdoer is clothed with authority of state is action taken under color of law. That's when they violate your rights under the color of law that they do that, and they do it all the time. Oh, here's prima facie. Okay, this is taken from a court case called State ex rel. Herbert versus Wims, found at 68 Ohio Appellate Courts, page 39, and it's also found at book 38 Northeast Reports, second edition, page 596. And it's also taken from Black's Law Dictionary, 5th edition, on page 1071. Anyways, quote, prima facie, at first sight, on first appearance, on the face of it, so far as can be judged from first disclosure, presumably, a fact presumed to be true unless disproved by some evidence to the contrary, unquote. Now, here's another word that we're going to be talking about here now when we're talking about color of law, is presumed, or presumption, or presumably. You know, didn't they put somewhere in the Constitution that you have the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law? Well, what do you think that's all about? That's because they're making presumptions. And if they're making presumptions, it's because of color of law. Think about it. I mean, it's all over the place. It's right in front of your nose. Prima facie. Okay, remember we were talking about that at the Office of Law Revision Counsel. And so they said all the non-positive law statutes are prima facie evidence of the laws of the United States. That means that they're only laws of the United States at first look, okay? In other words, if you can introduce some evidence that says that that's not a law, then it's not, okay? That's actually part of the de facto officer doctrine, too, okay? If you can introduce some evidence that they have no authority, then they don't. But until you do, they do. And that's really what it comes down to, okay? And that's why my procedure works, okay? And that's why they came to visit me in Texas, the Texas State Police and the FBI, and they told me that I'm listed as sovereign in their system because my documents are designed to take away their presumptions, and I serve it on them long before they ever see me on the radar. And that's what you have to do. And the reason is that there's two things going on here. First of all, everything's under martial law, and so martial law works on presumption. The second thing is that either I provided them with evidence that says I'm one of their slaves, or that because so many people out there have provided them with evidence that they are one of their slaves. It's to the point now that they can presume that everybody did, okay? But either way, I have to defeat those presumptions. And the best way of doing it is up front, long before they ever see me on the radar. And the reason that is because even in common law, if I plead something, if there is something that's material to my case that I can plead, and I don't do it at the proper time, then I lose that opportunity. And that's alluding to what the courts have given them as basically qualified immunity is what's happened. Okay, in other words, they all have what's known as qualified immunity, and qualified immunity essentially says that. And we actually go through that when we in another presentation in my presentation on practical considerations, which is one of the last ones we go through in the series. Anyways, in there it talks about qualified immunity, and it basically says that that they have immunity as long as they're working, operating in good faith, sort of thing. And so when I serve them with my document, I tell them that you have no more authority over me than a Walmart rent-a-cop. I tell them I'm the king, and the only authority you have is authority that I delegated. And I just go down the list. It's probably I mean nowadays it's 20 pages, a legal size too. So you're talking 14 inches long. There's a lot of stuff in there. There's probably 100 paragraphs, and so I just go down and hit them point by point, and I tell them that and one of the things I tell them is I'm going to be driving without a driver's license, and I'm not required to have a driver's license, and you have no more authority over me than a Walmart rent-a-cop. And once I do that, then they don't. And that's why they put me down as sovereign in their system, because they're essentially telling all of their hired thugs, leave this guy alone or it is going to be your worst nightmare. That's essentially what they're telling them. And because what will happen, and I've had some that did try, I had a Pennsylvania Attorney General that sent me a letter and said, if you drive in Pennsylvania without a driver's license, well, they're going to arrest you and put you in jail. And I went and attached all of that. He sent me back my letter with all his stamps over saying receipt and everything, great evidence. And so I attached his letter to my letter to a criminal complaint for treason, sedition, perjury of oath, multiple felonies. And I sent it to the U.S. Attorney's Office. And 2 weeks later, I got a letter back from the U.S. Attorney, and it said, we referred this matter to the FBI. And a month or two later, I was looking on the Pennsylvania Attorney General's website, and they had an acting Attorney General there. And that's the power, okay? So in other words, if you lay a proper foundation, okay, if you take away their presumptions in the right way, in a way that you can prove and that's admissible as evidence in a court, then what happens is that, and then they violate your rights. Well, now our public servants will take care of it for us, and they do. They do all the time. We really do have a good government. And the only reason that there's a problem is because of our own ignorance. That's really what it comes down to. Anyways, quote, the code is only prima facie evidence of the laws of the United States. Title I, United States Code, Section 204A, where a consistency between the United States and the statutes at large appears, the statutes at large prevail over the code. And that's Stephen versus United States, 319 U.S. 423, U.S. Supreme Court, and it's important to note that that's what happens is when they pass a law, then it goes into the statutes at large, and if the law doesn't get approved and adopted properly, then it's not going to go into the statutes at large. That's the bottom line, and so therefore, if just because it's in the code doesn't mean it's in the statutes at large. Okay, and so that's the important thing to understand, is that just because it's in the code doesn't mean it's in the statutes at large. And on top of that, just because it's in the statutes at large doesn't mean it'll be in the code either. And so there's a lot of things that are in the statutes at large that are not in the code. And so it'd be a good idea. But there's a lot of that kind of material. That's like there's hundreds of books. I've got most of the statutes at large, and I think there's like about 150 volumes, and it's way too much to email. Some of those books are like 100 megs, and so you can imagine how much stuff there is. So it's a lot of stuff, the important thing to understand is that, and this is why I do this, okay? Because I don't want to learn all their codes, rules, and regulations, okay? Is that, I mean, they have millions of them, okay? If I was subject to all their codes, rules, and regulations, I'd be a slave, okay? And I don't want to learn all those codes, rules, and regulations because they change them every time you change your socks, okay? They change some today. And so there's no way that you can possibly keep up to it. And that's the way it's intended. Quite frankly, it's meant to enslave everybody, and at least anybody that wants to be a slave. And so unless you do what I do, you're going to be a slave. And you may not know it, but, think about it. The best slave is the one that thinks he's free. So the bottom line is, though, is that that's why I do this stuff, because I'm not interested in being their slave, and all I need to know is I need to know it enough to show that it doesn't apply to me. That's all I need to know. I don't need to know much at all. I just go into their definition section, and I can find that real easy. And so that's nice and easy. I don't have to worry about none of that stuff then. I just go through there, and I point that out in my documents and tell them how that it's call of law, and it doesn't mean anything to me. And I'm the king. And so that's all I need to do. And it's real easy. And I just cut to the chase, and they put me down a solid. Quote, it is well settled that the code cannot prevail over the statutes at large when the two are inconsistent. And that's, again, Stephen versus United States, 319 U.S. 423. The provisions of the code are merely prima facie evidence of the law. And that's American Export Lines, Inc. versus United States Code versus United States, I'm sorry. And that's 290 Federal Report, 2nd edition, page 925. Quote, but the legislature specifically disclaimed any intention to change the meaning of any statute. The compilers of the code were not empowered by Congress to amend existing law, and doubtless had no thought of doing so. The act before us does not purport to amend a section of an act, but only a section of a compilation entitled Revised Code of Washington, which is not the law. Such an act purporting to amend only a section of a prima facie compilation leaves the law unchanged, unquote. And that's Perosa versus Tacoma, 57 Washington Report, 2nd edition, page 409. So, I mean, this is so powerful because they actually just passed an act that revised the code. I mean, that's like saying, I'm going to revise my owner's manual today for my car. What's that got to do with me? It shows how much of a farce it is, quite frankly. But it just makes me laugh. But anyways, that's what the kind of stuff they do. Okay, they know it's not the law. They're playing games, and so then all of this stuff is published into something that looks like law, but it's not. And if you're one of the sheeple that thinks you have to follow this code, then you're a slave. And all you need to know is who you are, and you're the king. That's all you do is need to know who you are. Do you know who you are? Quote, this, I said it before and I'll say it again. I put this in here twice because it's so powerful. Quote, an unconstitutional act is not law. It confers no rights. It imposes no duties, affords no protection. It creates no office. It is in legal contemplation as inoperative as though it had never been passed, unquote. And that's Norton versus Shelby County, 118 U.S. 425, U.S. Supreme Court. When they say it so well. Quote, absolute nullity, civil law, an act that is void because it is against public policy, law, or order. The nullity is non-curable. It may be invoked by any party or by the court, unquote. And that's Black's Law Dictionary, 8th edition, page 3391. And that's exactly what the Income Tax Act is. That's exactly what the British North America Bill is. It's an absolute nullity. It means absolutely nothing. That's exactly what any of this stuff, Customs Act. Now we'll talk a little bit about some maxims of law. And this one is called Adjustum Generis. And it's Latin for of the same kind. This is taken from Black's Law Dictionary, 8th edition. Anyways, Adjustum Generis is Latin for of the same kind, used to interpret loosely written statutes, where a law lists specific classes of persons or things and then refers to them in general. The general statements only apply to the same kind of persons or things specifically listed. Example, if a law refers to automobiles, trucks, tractors, motorcycles, and other motor-powered vehicles, then vehicles would not include airplanes, since the list was of land-based transportation. And that's, pretty simple. And so the important thing to remember is that they have to put similar things together. So now we'll go to the next slide here, and we'll talk about some other stuff like some examples. We'll talk about some examples. Title 26, United States Code, Section 7701A1. Okay, this is the definition section in the Internal Revenue Code. Okay, the so-called Income Tax Act, which is the Income Tax Bill, I guess. Person. The term person shall be construed to mean and include an individual, trust, estate, partnership, association, company, or corporation. Well, then think about it. Based on Adjustum Generis, what do you think an individual is, since they're listing an individual with a trust, estate, partnership, association, company, or corporation? Does anybody want to answer by Skype? An individual is obviously a fictitious entity under Adjustum Generis, because all the rest of them are fictitious entities. And that is clearly, if you understand the law and everything else, that is perfectly consistent with the law and everything, okay? I can show you court cases that say that a person is a fictitious entity. Matter of fact, we'll cover some of those. Okay, now there's another thing about includes, okay? You saw includes in that. We talked about that. Well, in Montello Salt versus Utah, another Supreme Court case, 221 U.S. 455, include or the participial form thereof is defined to comprise within or hold, to contain, enclosed, comprise, comprehend, embrace, involve. In other words, includes, when they put includes in the statute, they should have said means, okay? But they like to put includes in there because for those who don't know the law, they're going to think, oh, gee, I guess that includes me. And it doesn't, okay? 99.9% of the time, unless, of course, you're one of their slaves. Then it does. Now, so then based on that definition, let's go back to this 26 United States Code, Section 7701A1, person. Person, the term person shall be construed to mean and include an individual, trust, estate, partnership, association, company, and corporation. So then, based on that definition of include, is there anything else that's there? Absolutely not. Okay, it's only, and it should see and means, but it says to construe to mean and include, and really, these lawyers like to do that stuff because it confuses people, because really what they're saying is shall be construed to mean, and they don't want to look that obvious, so they put include in there. Anyways, so it mean an individual, trust, estate, partnership, association, company, or corporation. So that's the bottom line, though, is that it's a fictitious entity, and there's nothing else that's there that's not specifically listed. And so let's keep going here. Expressio unius e exclusio alterius, and that is Latin again. You know, one of the things that we're going to be talking about is a lot of Latin, because there's a lot of Latin used in the law, and that's because of a lot of the law actually comes from Rome, okay, and the Vatican, and we'll talk about that. Matter of fact, this is a canon of construction. Well, gee, canon of construction, that sounds very, very Vatican-y. You know, when you're talking canon law, this is a canon of construction, holding that to express or include one thing implies the exclusion of the other or of the alternative. For example, the rule that each citizen is entitled to vote implies that non-citizens are not entitled to vote. And so, again, you have to know the law, and this is, you know, part of it. And now we're going to talk a little bit about definitions, or I should say some court cases, and some court cases have actual quotes, and some of them have summaries of what the case says. And this is going to be a quote. This is U.S. versus Minker, 350 U.S. 179, 1956, U.S. Supreme Court. Quote, "But the subpoena is in the form of an official command, and even though improvidently issued, it has some coercive tendency, either because of ignorance of their rights on the part of those whom it purports to command, or their natural respect for what appears to be an official command, or because of the reluctance to test the subpoena's validity by litigation," unquote. You know, and that's a good citation, but I like the summary better, okay, and this is the summary. Because of their ignorance for what appears to be a law, many people are cunningly coerced into waiving their rights due to ignorance. And that is a way better. I like that better. So that's what I put in my court cases, and what I put in my documents. There's another one, Penhallow versus Doan's Administrators, and that's an old one. That's 3 U.S. 54, 1795. Okay, and the actual quote starts off with, "A distinction was taken at the bar between the state and the people of the state. It is a distinction I'm not capable of comprehending." And then it goes on in about a 2-page diatribe and shows why the judge is not capable of comprehending the difference between a people of the state and the state. And the significance of this is the summary, and the summary speaks it way better. And it's a summary again. It summarizes 2 pages of diatribe that this judge goes through, that summarizes it in a paragraph. And the summary just speaks volumes. And this is the summary. "Inasmuch as every government is an artificial person, an abstraction, and a creature of the mind only, a government can interface only with other artificial persons. The imaginary, having neither actuality nor substance, is foreclosed from creating and attaining parity with the tangible. The legal manifestation of this is that no government, as well as any law, agency, aspect, court, etc., can concern itself with anything other than corporate artificial persons and the contracts between them." And so therefore, if you think about it, and I've said this many times before, but I'll say it again, there is literally nothing the government can do to affect the people. Isn't that what that says? That's exactly what that says. There is nothing the government can do to affect the people. And think about it. Why did we set it up? We, the people, set up the government. We delegate the power to the government. So why it wouldn't even try to affect the people? That's exactly what the courts are saying. There is nothing the government can do to affect the people. If the government is affecting you, well, you've consented to it somehow. That's exactly what's going on. And there's a lot of ways you can consent, and it's always because of your ignorance. It's always, 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 always because of your ignorance, and because of the ignorance of your parents, maybe. But the bottom line is the buck rests with me and you and everyone individually. It's our responsibility to know the law and how the law works, and it's our responsibility to assert our rights, and it's our responsibility to do the right thing. And so, you know, the buck stops here. You really can't blame it on anybody else. It just stops right here. This is where it goes. Here's another summary. And this is Rodriguez versus Donovan, 769 Federal Report, second edition, page 1344. And the summary says, all codes, rules, and regulations are unconstitutional and lacking in due process. And yeah, it says it all. Exactly. And now, when they use the word unconstitutional, it's important to understand what that means. Because, for example, and we talk about this, we might talk about it here later in this presentation, but it's very, very important to understand that I'm sure everybody's heard about the Bill of Rights in the United States, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Well, there's the first 10 amendments to the Constitution were put in place to protect common law rights, okay? And so when they're talking about constitutional rights, they're talking about common law rights. That's exactly what they're talking about. And so then when they're saying all codes, rules, and regulations are unconstitutional, well, that's saying that they're violating common law rights. That's what they're saying. That's essentially what they're saying. That's exactly what they're saying. And lacking in due process. Okay? Due process. What is that? Okay? That's taken from Chapter 29 of the Magna Carta, which is common law. Okay? Due process is taken from Chapter 29 of the Magna Carta. And what that means is that Chapter 29 of the Magna Carta says that they will not go upon you or send upon you except by a jury of your peers of the law of the land. Okay? And the law of the land is common law. And what that's essentially saying is that they have to bring a common law indictment against you if they're going to do anything to you. Otherwise, they cannot touch you. And that's what this Rodriguez versus Donovan is saying. All codes, rules, and regulations are unconstitutional and lacking in due process. And so it's common law rights, okay? Anytime they say something is unconstitutional, that just means that there's common law rights being violated. And they can't do that because the Constitution protects our common law rights. And so that's what we have to understand, and so, people in Canada, they think that that doesn't apply to them. Well, it absolutely does. Because again, they're protecting common law rights. And common laws in Canada, it's the same common law. It all came from England. Now let's look at some statutes. Section 35.1, Interpretation Act of Canada. So you want to know what Canada is? Here's what Canada is. Quote, Canada, for greater certainty, includes the internal waters of Canada and the territorial sea of Canada, unquote. Well, remember what includes means? Remember that? Remember we covered that a little while ago? Includes is limiting. That means really what this means, okay? And so if we took includes out and put means in its place, then it would read, Canada, for greater certainty, means the internal waters of Canada and the territorial sea of Canada. And that's 100% correct. Canada is water. Canada is Admiralty Maritime Law. Canada is a bunch of pirates. Here's another one. Section 35.1, Interpretation Act of Canada. Quote, person or any word or expression descriptive of a person includes a corporation, unquote. Well, so then, that's consistent with Canada being a bunch of pirates because a person is a corporation. So what's that got to do with me? They pass good statutes. The burden's on us to know the law. And we go and get ourselves mixed up in things. And so then whose fault is it? Yes, the bureaucrats can run around and sit there and twist your arm and coerce you and do all sorts of stuff. And they do it all the time. But it's because everybody's so clueless. The burden's on us. It's got to stop somewhere. And so if we don't do something about it, then we're at least partially responsible when they do it to the next guy. The burden's on us to train our bureaucrats. I filed a lawsuit in Canada. It was actually, I called it a petition of right, but it was a lawsuit. But I called it a position of right because I didn't want to pay any filing fees. And they ultimately got it dismissed, which I expected them to. But they got it dismissed on this Crown Liabilities Proceedings Act. And one of the things I brought up in the case is that they had no authority to impose the Crown Liabilities Proceedings Act against me because I'm not a person, and it's treason and sedition for them to try and do that. They cannot. Part of the Crown Liabilities and Proceedings Act is that it eliminates the petition of right, and they don't have any authority to do that either. And I was just looking for the Crown Liabilities and Proceedings Act because I'm getting ready to file a criminal complaint against a bunch of Canadian actors, and I wanted to add that into my criminal complaint. And there is no more Crown Liabilities and Proceedings Act. They got rid of it. See, that's the point. Until somebody complains, they're going to abuse you. That's the point. When somebody complains, they'll correct it. That's how it works. It's the nature of governments to encroach. And it's up to us, it's up to we the people to slap them. And you can do it a lot of different ways. You can file lawsuits against them. You can send them a registered letter. You can file criminal complaints against them. There's a lot of ways you can do it. But as long as you got your ducks in a row, you got your points correct, you know what you're talking about, and you bring up the right issues, then it'll work. You may not, I got my case dismissed. And I wanted some people in jail. I wanted hangings. I wanted all sorts of stuff, eh? And I never got any of that. But I got the end result is that there's some of the stuff I've seen some positive results already. First of all, the Premier of Alberta, after I filed criminal complaints against the judge, and that judge's career is probably ruined, and those prosecutors, their career is probably ruined. But the Premier, he didn't run for re-election. He all of a sudden decided not to run for re-election. And so, there are some things that happen because of this. And I'm convinced that it's because of stuff that I did. But they'll never say anything. They'll never, ever, ever admit that anything you do has anything to do with what happens, because you got to understand that you're accusing them of felonies. You're accusing them of jail crimes, many crimes, multiple crimes. And so they will never, ever admit it because if they did, it'd be like saying, go ahead, take me down and put me in jail. Anyways, keep moving here. So on Section 2, Criminal Code of Canada, it says, quote, everyone, person, and owner and similar expressions include Her Majesty in an organization. So, and if you read the Criminal Code of Canada, it says that stuff all over the place. So what's that got to do with me? Everyone, person, and owner are Her Majesty in an organization. So what's that got to do with me? Anyways, I need to take a little break here. Are you there, Kat?
I am, Glenn.
Can you play a little song or something like that while I take a little break?
I certainly can. Take care.
Okay, this is Glenn Winningham, House of Fern, back on the Do You Know Who You Are radio program on These Changing Times radio network. And we are talking about color of law, and before we get too carried away here, let's do a little station identification and everything. My website is www.sovereigntyinternational.info. You're listening to These Changing Times Radio Network. I have a couple groups. There's one group that's on These Changing Time Radio website called sovereigntyinternational.info. It's on the groups tab. On the front page, you'll see a groups tab, and click on there, and then you'll see a list of groups, and one of them will be sovereigntyinternational.info, and I've uploaded a few documents there, and I've uploaded links to my YouTube videos, especially these radio programs, so you can go to YouTube and get the radio programs that you missed. I've also uploaded about 100 YouTube videos, over 100, and so you can also, I highly recommend you watch some of my other YouTube videos because they'll talk about similar things that we're talking about here as well. And I've also got some private groups at Yahoo and Google. They're called Administrating Your Public Servants, both at Yahoo groups and Google groups. And I've also got a YouTube profile. I've got my YouTube profile is Sovereign Living. And you can get, I recommend you watch some of my videos there as well. Anyway, so we'll keep moving on this call of law presentation. And the last thing we're talking about is in Section 2, the Criminal Code of Canada. It talks about everyone, person, and owner, and similar expressions include Her Majesty in an organization. And so, therefore, when you think of the fact that includes is limiting and means, therefore it should read everyone, person, and owner, and similar expressions mean Her Majesty and an organization. And so, therefore, again, do you know who you are? This is taken Criminal Code of Canada too as well. This is, I'm not sure which section this is in, but it's up in the definition section. But anyways, it says municipality includes a corporation of a city, town, village, county, township, parish, or other territorial local subdivision of a province, the inhabitants of which are incorporated or are entitled to hold property collective for a public purpose. And that's actually probably true. Again, so you have to be careful how you put yourself down. You know, in other words, I don't live in the city of New York. I live in New York City. Okay, the city of New York's a corporation. New York City is the place, and so I can live in a place without being in a corporation. And so it's all in what you put down. I don't live in Sussex, in the county of Sussex. I live in Sussex County, and both of those entities are there. I guarantee you. And so every county, there's at least 2, maybe 3. And so again, do you know who you are? You have to make sure absolutely clear that you don't live in a corporation, because if you live in a corporation, you are a corporation. And this criminal code, this section of Criminal Code of Canada is saying that. This is Alberta Interpretation Act. Quote, person includes a corporation and the heirs, executors, administrators, or other legal representatives of a person, unquote. Well, gee, that sounds like a bunch of corporations. Alberta Traffic Safety Act. Quote, driver means a person who is driving or in actual physical control of a vehicle, unquote. Well, gee, that sounds like another corporation, because a person's corporation. Section 14 of the Interpretation Act. No enactment is binding on Her Majesty or affects Her Majesty's rights or prerogatives. You're going to see this word places too, okay? We're going to see that word in other places. So no enactment is binding on Her Majesty or affects Her Majesty or Her Majesty's rights or prerogatives in any manner unless the enactment expressly states that it binds Her Majesty. And that's Section 14 of the Interpretation Act of Alberta. And this is the Manitoba This is the Manitoba Drivers and Vehicles Act. Quote, requirement for driver's license. Driver's license required to drive motor vehicle. A person may not drive a motor vehicle. Okay, it says it right there. Okay. Only a person may not drive a motor vehicle. It says it right there. And so that's Section 4.1 of the Manitoba Drivers and Vehicles Act. You know, it's not that hard to find that kind of stuff. You have to kind of look around sometimes and just follow the acts and see where they take you. But yeah, it's not that hard to find. And this is Section 29 of the Interpretation Act of BC. In an enactment, person includes a corporation, partnership, or party, or the personal or other legal representatives of a person to whom the context can apply according to law. And unquote. And again, lawyers like to throw in all sorts of stuff that's confusing, but you just have to understand, have to cut to the chase, you know, and look at it and see what they're really talking about. You know, I do aerospace engineering consulting, and I travel all over the world, and I've been doing it for 35 years. And so I deal with law and regulation all day, every day, as far as aviation is concerned. And aviation is highly regulated. Everything that goes on in aviation is regulated in some way or another. And so, so I know how the law works. And believe me, you know, that's what you have to do when you're reading the law, is you just cut to the chase and see what exactly they're talking about. These lawyers kind of dream up all sorts of stuff to try and make it confusing. Section 17 in the Interpretation Act of Canada. Quote, no enactment is binding on Her Majesty or affects Her Majesty's rights or prerogatives in any manner except as mentioned or referred to in the enactment. Okay? So again, it's the same kind of thing that was in the Alberta Interpretation Act. Section 1, Motor Vehicle Act of BC. Okay, quote, in an enactment, owner includes a person in possession of a motor vehicle. Okay, a person. So an owner is a person, and a person is a fictitious entity. So I think that's pretty simple. You don't want to be an owner, do you? A driver. This is the Motor Vehicle Act of BC, Section 90.3, subsection 1. Driver means a person who holds a driver's license. No, I'm sorry. Driver means a driver who holds the driver's license on which the condition is imposed under Section 25.10.1 and includes any such person. You know, all these lawyers like to dance around all the time and, you know, don't like to cut to the chase because it keeps people confused. But the bottom line is the driver's a person. Section 87 of the Legislation Act of Ontario, that's the equivalent of an Interpretation Act in Ontario. Quote, in every act and regulation, person includes a corporation. Well, that means that person is a corporation. Section 71 of the Legislation Act of Ontario. Quote, no act or regulation binds Her Majesty or affects Her Majesty's rights or prerogatives unless it expressly states an intention to do so, unquote. Well, if it doesn't affect Her Majesty, it certainly doesn't affect me because Her Majesty has the oath of office to protect my rights. So that's even better. That's good. I like that. Section 1, subsection 1 of the Highway Traffic Act of Ontario. Quote, in this act, driver means a person. So, again, are you a person? Do you know who you are? This is the Public Utilities Act of Ontario, and they're all very similar. You know, all of the acts. You know, I was reading through these acts. I mean, I had the act regulating drivers in Ontario, BC, Alberta, and Manitoba. So that's 4 of the provinces right there. And they're all very similar. You know, I haven't found one yet that said anything different, quite frankly. Quote, this is Public Utilities Act of Ontario, Section 59. It says, if any person supplied with any public utility neglects to pay rent, rate, charge, due, okay, and it goes on and says they can disconnect them. The bottom line, though, is it's only a person. They can only disconnect the utilities from a person. And so that's the argument, okay? And there's people I know that will get the utilities hooked up, and then they'll say, well, I'm not. When they send the bill to a postal code and to an all block capital letters name, and they refuse it for fraud. refuse it for fraud, and send it back, and then they'll call up the utility company and say, I really wanted to pay this bill, but you sent it to this corporation and a postal code, and that's fraud. I can't accept the bill, I want to pay the bill, and so if you'll please send it to my name spelled properly in upper lowercase and with no postal code, then I'll pay it. What happens every month, they send the bill again, all block capital letters and postal code. Every month he sends it back and calls him up. I really want to pay the bill, give him the same song and dance. 16 months later, he's still got the utilities and he hasn't paid the bill. And then he moves and they forgive him the bill. And the reason is there's a couple things going on. First of all, they don't have authority to disconnect you if you're not a person. And second of all, he offered to pay the bill. And even in the Uniform Commercial Code, if you offer to tender payment and they don't accept it, then the debt is discharged. This is the Indian Act, Section 2, subsection 1. Quote, in this act, Indian means person. It's all persons. It's all fictitious entities. In this act, elector means a person. Okay, that's the Indian Act too. So again, if you're going to vote, you have to be a person. This is the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And this is the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, so that's Section 28. We're going to go through some U.S. stuff here pretty soon, so for anybody that's interested. Quote, notwithstanding anything in this charter, the rights and freedoms referred to in it are guaranteed equally to male and female persons, unquote. Well, so the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is for corporations. That's exactly what it's for. And really, it's what I'm putting in my criminal complaint is what there is. See, it's a bait and switch program is what it is. Because think about it. There's court cases that say that my common law rights are unwritten. There's nothing defining. No statute is required to define what my common law rights are. So when they go and create this charter, and the charter defines some rights, then it's a bait and switch program because all these clueless people out there and say the charter protects my rights. Well, yes, it does. If you're a slave, then yes, it does protect your rights. But my rights are undefined. That means my rights, I have all the rights. My rights are unwritten. My rights are unlimited. There is no limit to my rights. The slaves, their rights are limited by this charter. And if they're not covered by the charter, then they're out of luck. Think about that. This is United States Code, okay? We're going to talk some U.S. stuff now. Quote, the word persons and whoever include corporations, companies, associations, firms, partnerships, societies, and joint stock companies, as well as individuals. Well, so what? That's all fictitious entities. Texas Transportation Code, Section 541.001. Quote, person means an individual, firm, partnership, association, or corporation. Okay, a person's fictitious entity. This is Texas Government Code. Quote, person includes corporation, organization, government or governmental subdivision or agency, business, trust, estate, trust, partnership, association, or any other legal entity, unquote. Still all fictitious entities. Texas Transportation Code 541.001.1. Operator, as used in reference to a vehicle, a person who drives or has physical control of a vehicle, unquote. Well, so an operator is a fiction. It's a fictitious entity. That's what I've always tried to get my head around. I just cannot seem to be able to get my head around. Because how can a corporation be driving that car down the road? Because a corporation is a fictitious entity. It doesn't exist. So then there's nobody driving that car down the road? How does that work? Texas Transportation Code, Section 541.002. Quote, police officer means an officer authorized to direct traffic or arrest persons. Unquote. So they're not authorized to arrest me. That's why it's an unlawful arrest. Any police officer in Texas tried to arrest me, that's an unlawful arrest. And I have a right to resist an unlawful arrest with lethal force if necessary, and I told them that. And that's why they don't mess with me. Quote, this is Texas Government Code again, section 311.005, bracket 7. Quote, state, when referring to a part of the United States, includes any state, district, commonwealth, territory, insular possession in the United States, and any area subject to the legislative authority of the United States of America, unquote. And, you know, they really do a lot of wordsmithing when they do that stuff, I'll tell you, because they're essentially saying, they're saying it twice, okay, because it says includes any state, district, commonwealth, territory, insular possession in the United States. Okay, that is Guam, American Samoa, and Puerto Rico. And then any area subject to the legislative authority of the United States of America. And that includes Guam, American Samoa, and Puerto Rico. And but it does include all of the corporate governments of all of these states, okay? Because all of the states have actually got two governments, 2 or 3. Remember, there's a court case that says that the government is an agency of the state, and the state is the people, right? And so there's the government's the corporation, and the corporation has to do what the United States tells them. But the people, they don't have to do what the government tells them. See what I'm saying? Because we're the kings. We're the kings and queens. This is Texas Government Code, section 311.005. United States includes a department, bureau, or other agency of the United States of America. Yeah, that's probably about right. And this is interesting because this is talking about Canada now, because in Article 11 of the U.S. Articles of Confederation, it says, quote, Canada acceding to this confederation and adjoining to the measures of the United States shall be admitted into and entitled to all the advantages of this union, but no other colony shall be admitted into the same unless such admission be agreed to by the United States. So Canada could join at any time after the Articles of Confederation. And the Articles of Confederation were 1778, I think, something like that, way back then. They did the Articles of Confederation, and then what happened? The Constitution was done about 10 years later. The U.S. Constitution was ratified in 1787. And so it was about 10 years later when the Constitution was done. So the Articles of Confederation were done 10 years before, and they're still in place. They've never, I don't think they can repeal them or alter them. Anyways, Canada is part of the United States. And the first part of the evidence that I want to present is that Article 11 of the Articles of Confederation. And then also under the Texas statutes, it says it. And the reason, we'll go to that, Section 541.002, Governmental Authorities. And in this subtitle, subtitle 5, it says, subsection 5, it says, state has the meaning assigned by Section 311.005 Government Code and includes a province of Canada. And so then when you go into Section 311.005 of the Government Code, general definitions, it says a state, when used in referring to a part of the United States, includes any state, district, commonwealth, territory, insular possession of the United States, and any area subject to the legislative authority of the United States. And what they're essentially saying is that a province of Canada is subject to the legislative authority of the United States, and it could be a state of the United States. Either way, it's part of the United States. And when you're in Canada, quite frankly, they do a lot of things just like they do in the States. You know, a good example is in the United States, for example, if you have I-35 that goes through, a good example is Dallas-Fort Worth area. Okay, I-35 goes through there, but when it gets to Dallas-Fort Worth area, it goes to 35W and 35 East. Okay, but it also could, in Southern California, I-5 goes through Los Angeles, and so what will happen is parts of I-5 will break off and kind of go ring around And like you go, I-5 will go through downtown basically, and then but they'll have a part of I-5 that'll part of the I-5 freeway that'll go off to the side, and it'll be called a 605. And then another part will go off to the other side somewhere else, and it'll be called a 405. Well, they do the same thing in Canada around Edmonton. They have Highway 16 goes through Edmonton, and they have this ring road that goes around Edmonton, and it's called the 216. And so it's done the same way, and I am positive that it's because they're following U.S. laws, and they have to. And in fact, there's a friend of mine that he's a truck driver, and he's from Texas, and he was taking a load up to Canada, and he was talking to some of the regulatory authorities up there, and they told him that Canada is part of the United States, and but they're just getting the people used to the idea. That's true. And so looks like somebody's got a question. Question from from the chat. Mark, how do you get the Attorney General to write back? He didn't write back to me. Well, they're smart if they won't, okay? And again, if you're the king, you just give them instructions, okay? I tell them what to do, okay? And if they don't do it, then it's perjury of oath, basically. But again, his only duty to me is to protect my rights, okay? I don't have to tell him what to do as far as approving some law or passing some bill or something like that, because that's all private, okay? That has nothing to do with me. That's some Ford corporation, okay? It's like Ford and GM. And so I can't tell Ford and GM how to run their personal affairs, but I can tell them to protect my rights, and especially when they have an oath of office that says that implies that they'll protect my rights. And so, and that's what I do, and I demand it. And when we go through the presentation on asserting your sovereignty, you'll understand what that's all about. But so if they're smart, they won't respond, quite frankly. I'd be surprised if they did. 9 times out of 10, well, I won't say, but at least 50-50. I've got about 50% positive responses and 50% negative responses. So, I mean, if they do anything but grovel, it's a negative response, and I'll file a criminal complaint against them, and the next thing you know, they'll be gone. So that's the thing, is that if they're smart, they won't respond. It's the bottom line. So Canada's part of the United States. And further evidence of that is, I've got an SEC website that talks about, that shows Canada being domiciled in the District of Columbia. And that's an SEC website that shows that. Okay, now this is taken from Revised Codes of Washington, and quote, in this state and within the state, in the state and within this state, includes all federal areas lying within the external boundaries of the state, unquote. So anytime, and I'll bet you there's a similar statute in every other state, in the U.S. at least, because I see that in those in Texas statutes for sure. You'll see that stuff all the time. And in every state that I've been in and looked in their statutes, you see that all over the place. It'll say, in this state, if this is done in this state, then it's crime. Okay? Well, what they're essentially saying is that that's only in federal areas lying within that state. Okay? Well, and then if you carry that a little bit further, there's really no federal areas. Very few states have federal areas in them. In order for, like even Texas is a perfect example, and I used to be Speaker of the House of Representatives for the Republic of Texas, so I happen to know about this. In Texas, we did some research into finding out if there's any federal enclaves in Texas. And the reason is that in order for a federal enclave to exist in Texas, Texas had to actually pass an act and cede the land to the United States to make the federal enclave. And that was never done. And so there are no federal enclaves in Texas. And so then if you think about it, then there's no federal areas in Texas. And yet, if you think about it also, if you understand anything about Texas, some of the largest U.S. military bases are in Texas. Fort Hood in Killeen, Texas, is a huge military base, huge Army base. And it's in Texas. And yet, it's not a federal enclave. And so it's not a federal area. It's still subject to the state of Texas. They have to do what the state of Texas tells them. And so, again, you have to understand the law and how the law works. This is taken from from Title VI, United States Code, Section 101. Okay. Now, remember, this is the Homeland Security code. Okay, and if you remember when we were going through the Office of Law Revision Counsel, this is non-positive law as well. Okay. Anyways, quote, the term United States, when used in a geographic sense, means any state of the United States, the District of Columbia, Guam, American Samoa, Puerto Rico, the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands, and then any possession of the United States, and any waters within the jurisdiction of the United States. Well, and it just listed all of the possessions, okay, because it says any state of the United States, and it listed District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands. Those are all possessions, okay? And then it says any waters within the jurisdiction of the United States. And that's true. And that means, the whole Navy, okay? All of the military power, especially the Navy, the U.S. Navy is clearly the United States. But if you, one thing we'll go into, I think it's later in this presentation, we talk about how the Admiralty jurisdiction, it's certainly in the Admiralty jurisdiction. When we cover Admiralty, when we talk about Admiralty maritime law, we'll go through how the United States has jurisdiction over vessels, okay, all vessels, and vessels carrying passengers and cargo on the highways of the United States is considered Admiralty maritime law, and their jurisdiction, that's in the waters. And so that brings in all sorts of stuff, okay? But again, it's all voluntary, okay? Admiralty maritime law is voluntary. And so, and they're talking about it here. But you have to volunteer. Quote, the term state means any state of the United States, the District of Columbia, Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, Guam, American Samoa, Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands, and any possession of the United States. And so they're essentially saying it twice. They just want you to think that it's more there than what's there. And that's Title VI, United States Code, again, the Homeland Security Act, or Homeland Security Code, Section 101. That's a different section. Title 18, United States Code, Section 911, that is positive law, by the way. Quote, whoever falsely and willfully represents himself to be a citizen of the United States shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 3 years or both, unquote. Now, I am absolutely convinced that the reason that's there is because there is no such thing as a U.S. citizen. And so then when you say I'm a U.S. citizen, you just committed a felony. And so now they can just go ahead and violate your rights all day long, and that's a contract. They view it because you just committed a felony. If you're not a United States citizen, you just entered into a contract to be one of their slaves. Is what you did, and because you committed a felony, and by committing that felony, that's exactly, it's a little strategy they have. And so again, do you know the law? We can presume they know the law, either that or their supervisors have perjured their oath of office, and this is a U.S. Supreme Court, quote, officers of the court have no immunity when violating a constitutional right, for they are deemed to know the law, unquote. And that's Owens versus Independence, 100 Supreme Court, page 1398. They have no right to charge a fee for their justice. And this is something I use when I file lawsuits. I don't pay filing fees. And this is what I tell them. It says, quote, Congress, this is Article 1, an amendment to the Constitution for the United States of America. And it's not the First Amendment, okay? That's, First Amendment is for slaves, okay? And where I got this from is from a certified copy of an 1819 Constitution. And it's got the true 13th Amendment, or Article 13 an amendment. And it says it's Article 1, an amendment in there. And so that's what I call it. And it's very important to use the correct terminologies because otherwise you're not going to describe the proper thing. Anyways, quote, Congress shall make no law abridging the right of the people to petition the government for redress of grievances, unquote. And that's what I told them when I went to the Supreme Court. You don't have any right. In the rules, in the Supreme Court rules, it says they can turn away any case they want. And so I tell them in my petition, I tell them that you have no right to turn this case away because I'm one of the people, and Congress shall make no law abridging the right of the people to petition the government for the redress of grievances. And if Congress can't make a law, then you certainly can't make a regulation. And so you cannot turn this case away. And they accept it every time. I've been there 3 times. They have no right to do anything to us except by common law. Quote, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, unquote. And that's Article 5 and Amendment, U.S. Constitution. The Magna Carta, it says similar things, okay? We can presume they know the law, either that or their supervisors have perjured their oath of office, and that's in Chapter 45. We will appoint as justices, constables, sheriffs, and bailiffs only such as know the law of the realm and mean to observe it well, unquote. They have no right to charge a fee, Magna Carta, Chapter 40. To none will we sell, to none will we refuse or delay right or justice, unquote. Law merchant is private international law. They're violating Chapter 38 of the Magna Carta. Quote, no bailiff for the future shall upon his unsupported complaint put anyone to his law without credible witnesses. That means 2. And that is very important because that's exactly what they do on the side of the road, if you think about it. Okay, when the cops stop you, okay, he's putting you to his law, and he has no witnesses. So where's your authority? You don't have any witnesses. And absolutely, that's what I'd be bringing up. You know, but he's got the guns. But again, do is be nice, be polite, and I always tell them, you know, I don't want you to take what I'm going to tell you personally, because I appreciate the work you do, but I have to assert my rights. They have no right to do anything to us except by common law, and again, that comes down to Chapter 29 of the Magna Carta. Quote, no freeman shall be taken in prison or deceased or exiled, in any way destroyed, nor will we go upon him nor send upon him except by the lawful judgment of peers or by the law of the land, unquote. Capitis Diminutio, this is Roman law. Remember, we were talking about Roman law, and this is what they're doing to us. Capitis Diminutio, meaning the diminishing of status through the use of capitalization. In Roman law, a diminishing or abridgment of personality, a loss or curtailment of a man's status or aggregate of legal attributes and qualifications. And that's taken from Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition. Capitis Diminutio media means minima means the minimal loss of status. There's 3 kinds of this. Capitis Diminutio media. Capitis Diminutio media is meaning the medium loss of status through the use of capitalization. In other words, John, upper and lower case, and Doe with all block capital letters. They do this in Canada all the time. A lesser or medium loss of status. This occurred where a man loses his rights of citizenship, but without losing his liberty. It carried away also the family rights. And that's Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition again. Capitis Diminutio maxima, meaning the maximum loss of status through the use of capitalization. John Doe in all block capital letters, or Joe Don in all block capital letters. I should say Doe John. Okay, so it's John Doe or Doe John, last name first, basically, in all block capital letters. The highest or most comprehensive loss of status. This occurred when a man's condition was changed from one of freedom to one of bondage, when he became a slave. It swept away all the rights of citizenship and all the family rights. And that's Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition. And they do that in the U.S. all the time. And they also do this in Canada, too, like on the passport, the Canadian passport. Cohen versus Virginia. This is the U.S. Supreme Court, 19 U.S. 264. Quote, we have no more right to decline the exercise of jurisdiction which is given than to usurp that which is not given. The one or the other would be treason to the Constitution. And so they're engaging in treason when they impose their jurisdiction on you. So arrest them. I've seen court cases that say they have to have the appearance of justice. Well, think about it. Isn't that sounds like color of justice. And that's exactly what it is. It's a fraud. They have no authority. We use the color of money to purchase the color of justice, to get the color of title for our land and our vehicles and our property. Do we really own everything? Anything? Everything is in fraud. It's like Ford Motor Company. Ford Motor Company makes rules and regulations for their employees. Does that mean anything to you? What happens when you get involved in the internal rules and regulations of Ford Motor Company? There's 2 jurisdictions in Canada, and there's 2 in the U.S. too, at least 2. There's one jurisdiction is the geographical federal landmass, and the other jurisdiction is the juristic federal unit, and a juristic person is a corporation. And that's found in words and phrases judicially decided in Canadian courts. And here it is, quote, the word Canada is used in Section 91(1) of the Constitution Act, does not refer to Canada as a geographical unit, but refers to the juristic federal unit. And then in Bouvier's Law Dictionary, 1915, it says the usual form of juristic person and the only one in common law is corporation. Worthington versus Manitoba, Supreme Court of Canada, 1936, Book 38, quote, when Parliament uses general terms like all persons and all residents, they're only talking about persons or residents who are properly within their jurisdiction, unquote. CBC versus Ontario, Supreme Court of Canada, 1959, 204. Parliament can only implicate a sovereign citizen by express mention or clear implication. Will versus Michigan State Police, 105, Lawyers Edition, 2nd edition, page 45, 1989. Quote, a sovereign is not a person as far as the statute's concerned, unquote. This is Church of Scientology versus U.S. Department of Justice, 1979. That's found at 612 Federal Report, 2nd edition, page 417. Quote, a person is a variety of entities other than human beings, unquote. And then here's another one, U.S. versus Otherson, 480 Federal Supplements, page 1369, 1979 as well. Quote, a person is a foreigner, not a citizen, unquote. A sovereign is not a person as far as the statute's concerned. We already covered a couple cases that talk about that, but here's some more. Quote, in common uses, the term person does not include the sovereign, and statutes employing the word are normally construed to exclude it, unquote. And that's Wilson versus Omaha Tribe, United States versus Cooper Corporation, United States versus Mine Workers, and Will versus Michigan State Police. And, quote, a sovereign is not a person in a legal sense, and that's Henry Fox, and that's U.S. versus Fox, 94 U.S. 315. So you don't want to be a person, and if you're a person, then you're a slave. You're a piece of property. You're a fictitious entity. You're a piece of property. And then, there's a lot of people going around talking about these executor letters and stuff like that. And that's just another person, there's a lot of, like, the Jesuits like to put out all sorts of disinformation. And so I usually stay away from that stuff. But so anything to do with a trust, there's a lot of people talking about trusts and trustees and stuff like that. Now, I got to say that I manage some trusts, but I'm not a trustee or a trustor or a grantor or anything to do with the trust. I'm just an employee. Anyways, trust is a contract to devise an equitable right, title, or interest in property. Remember, we were in martial law. We'll go into this a little bit more about equity and martial law and how that all relates to each other. Anyways, it's a trust is an equitable. It's an equitable right, title, or interest in property, real or personal, distinct from its legal ownership, or it is a personal obligation for paying, delivering, or performing anything where the person trusting has no real right or security, for by that act he confides altogether to the faithfulness of those entrusted. And that's Bouvier's Law Dictionary, 1856 edition. Beneficial interest. that right which a person has in a contract made with another, okay, a beneficiary. Okay, and now the reason we're talking about this is we're going to start talking about some quasi-contracts, okay? And the way you get involved in a quasi-contract is you take advantage of a benefit, okay, as in a beneficiary. You take advantage of a benefit when, and by taking advantage of the benefit, you're agreeing to the liability associated with that benefit. So we're talking about trusts and beneficiaries. And so a beneficial interest is that right that a person has in a contract, right? And that's, this is Bouvier's Law Dictionary, 1856 edition again. And then another definition of beneficiary is the term is frequently used synonymous with the technical phrase cestui trust. Okay, so this is talking about cestui trusts. And a beneficiary, 1856 edition. A beneficiary, this is Black's Law Dictionary, 7th edition. Beneficiary is a person who's designated to benefit from an appointment, disposition, or assignment. It could be a will, an insurance policy, or it could be a trust. Settler, person who makes a settlement of property, okay, and that's usually associated with a trust. Founder is a person who founds or establishes, usually it's a trust. Grantor is a person by whom a grant is made. Black's Law Dictionary, 2nd edition. Beneficiary, there's 3 definitions, and they're all persons, and it's related to trusts. Black's Law Dictionary, 8th edition. Settler, Black's Law Dictionary, 8th edition again. Settler, founder, creator, donor, settler, they're all persons. Equity, Bouvier's Law Dictionary, 1856 edition. Quote, in early history of the law, the sense affixed to this word was exceedingly vague and uncertain. This is owing in part to the fact that the chancellors of those days were either statesmen or ecclesiastics, perhaps not very scrupulous in the exercise of power. It was then asserted that equity was bounded by no certain terms, or limits, or rules, and that it was alone controlled by conscience and natural justice. And that's actually taken from Blackstone's commentaries. And that's Bouvier's Law Dictionary, 1856 edition. Bouvier's Law Dictionary, 1856 edition again. Equity, a court of equity. Quote, a court of equity is one which administers justice where there are no legal rights or legal rights, but courts of law do not afford a complete remedy, and where the complainant has also an equitable